Washington's defense stole the show at Tuesday's practice.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And just a quick reminder, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that little subscribe button down below. Click that little bell as well, so you never miss when we post a new show. And if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it all really does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, we're just getting back from Tuesday's practice. There's a whole lot to get to. We like saving a little segment at the end for some of the guys that stood out to me or you, and just give it a little agenda pushing time. You know, I got to talk about Justice Williams at the end because he really stood out to me today. We're going to talk about Adam Mohammad, another guy who had a really, really impressive day on Tuesday, and just looks like he's going to be a really important part of Washington's probably 4-man backfield at this point. But the big story of the day was Washington's defense was really, really strong in the red zone, and they allowed 3 touchdowns, and I want to say somewhere between 16 and 18 attempts.
Again, this is something where Jedd Fisch knew going in, last season, on both sides of the ball, the red zone was kind of a little bit of a struggle. And that's why you went out and got 2 twin towers, or the other twin tower. It's why you really bulked up as well. And we've started to see that in fall camp, where when in the red zone, everything gets condensed. And so it's already kind of, you can go a different way with it. But the fact that Ryan Walters has got these guys going, I think is promising, because you look at it and think, whether it's the safeties, whether it's the linebackers, all 3 levels of the defense, really, there's not a weakness when it comes to, the red zone and finding, holes or guys getting outmatched. Or the worst thing that we saw last season was guys, just making bad reads, taking bad angles. And I think that's something that's also been cleaned up, especially in the red zone.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm glad you started with the safeties there, because we talked to safeties coach Taylor Mays after practice, and he was asked who sets the tone, who sets the physicality on defense. And as any college football fan knows, he was one of those guys that loved to set the tone with the physicality. And he was like, I want to say it's my group, but it's not. It starts at the defensive line. He said our defensive line is extremely physical, and they've done a really, really good job in, just improving and just coming a long way from where they were last year to where they were this year. Obviously, he wasn't part of the group last year, but he still got a chance to watch him when he was part of the USC coaching staff and different things like that. So he's certainly gotten a chance to see what this defensive line has evolved into. And one guy who just really popped to me whenever he was on the field was Bryce Butler. This is a guy who I've had very high praise for Bryce Butler for a while. And today was one of those days where it really paid off, where he was in the backfield just in a flash. There were several times where, like for me personally, my eyes are always drawn to the quarterback for a good majority of the play, unless I tell myself I'm going to focus somewhere else in terms of just on a play-to-play basis. And there were several plays where Kai Horton, Damon Williams, Justin Keeney McMillan, whoever it was lined up under center, and they would go into a play action, or they would go through their drop, and my eyes are on them. And then all of a sudden there's just somebody just coming into my frame of view, and it's Bryce Butler. He's just so good at finding ways to shoot gaps and get in the backfield and blow plays up. I know I have him marked down for a sack today, a couple of TFLs, one of them on Julian McMahon, where there were several plays that just needed to be blown dead just like that quickly after they started, because Bryce Butler was already in the backfield. And when you and I talk about depth on the defensive line and what it could turn into, it's guys like that really, I don't want to say will make or break this defensive line, but I think there's a solid foundation in terms of the transfer talent you brought in. But having a guy like that, who was just not available for most of last season, having him be able to take that step forward. I know Jason Kafusi talked the other day about putting weight on him and really liking where he is right now, who can just be a disruptor like that and find different ways to get into the backfield and blow plays up is so, so important.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned what Kafusi said, because it reminded me when he said we didn't really get Bryce back until that last third of the season, if you want to call it. And even at that point, it was kind of hard for him to catch up. And there was a few reasons for that. None of them that we thought would hinder his, growth going into the season. But you also have to remember he's a junior college transfer. So that they wanted him in Arizona. Jason Kafusi and the staff and Matt Doherty identified him pretty early on in that process. And he was one of the first guys, I think, that ended up, announcing his formal transfer to Washington. And now you can kind of see why, where it's just another good, solid guy, a good veteran who's already, what you can say what you want about JUCO experience to Big Ten. There's obviously a massive gap there, but it's about having that high football IQ. That's really, I think, what Jason Kafusi prides himself on is finding guys that have the size, but also have the equal high football IQ to know once we put you in the right positions, and again, which is why you brought in Ryan Walters to run the scheme, everybody's now in their right position, where last season it was like one or two notches off, one or two notches here, left or right, that it wasn't clicking exactly right. And what Kafusi said about last season was kind of just building him into the program year. Now we're seeing him actually excel, and I think it's no surprise to either of us.
No, absolutely. That is such an important part of this. Sorry, I just want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about a couple of these guys because there were so many players that flashed, and one splash play. If anybody who follows us on here on YouTube or any form of social media probably saw our conversation with Taylor Mays after practice, where it was a lot about Rylon Dillard-Allen, who has really played on the edge of just physicality for the last couple of days, where he actually started a fight at Tuesday's practice as we're recording this, where he has been he's had no fear. And his aggressiveness has just, I don't want to say it's crossed the line because Taylor Mays didn't want to say that, but he's just pushing that line of physicality and just getting the most out of himself, his teammates and everything, where there was an overthrown ball in the end zone today and he just laid out Kevin Green. That's the second day in a row that's happened, and he took exception to that, and some players got together. There was no punches thrown or anything like that. There's just a little bit of a skirmish, heads coming together, people yelling at each other. And it's just, I don't want to say it's so much fun to see that happen. You never want to see, players go at each other like that. But on the first day of pads, obviously tempers are going to run hot a little bit from time to time. And obviously being coached by Taylor Mays, like I said a minute ago, he was that guy who would set that tempo physically. And Rylon, not being the biggest guy in the room, just seeing him play with that fire, play with that edge and that aggressiveness is so much fun, especially where something we saw a little bit more as UW got closer to the goal line, or the defense did in different packages on Tuesday, was we saw some 3 safety looks with Rylon out there with Alex McLaughlin and not McKellisteen. He's still recovering from a minor injury, and CJ Christian, and seeing those 3 guys on the field together. It was very, very interesting because Taylor Mays talked about how, it's nice to have one guy play that post role and still cover in the end zone. Somebody in the box who can fit runs, which was CJ Christian, getting their names all mixed up today. CJ Christian mainly on Tuesday, and then Rylon, who can play in the nickel if need be and still play in coverage and just kind of help out wherever he's asked to. And seeing all 3 of those guys on the field together, especially knowing that they all had that physicality, that edge to them, is a lot of fun to see and just a lot of fun to think about what that might look like this fall.
It reminded me of a hit where it's like, I just want you to know I'm here. Like I'm coming.
Sure.
I'm coming. And I think, which is ironic because we've been saying that for about a month, going into spring, where it was like, hey, Rylon's going to be a guy to watch. We ended up seeing a lot from him. And then it was like, okay, now going into fall camp, how is he going to find a way on the field? And I'm glad you mentioned the 3 safety look, because that, I think, is one way they're going to do it, because we've been saying for months now, you can't keep Rylon off the field. Even Rylon knew that back in February. It's like, no, I'm playing this year. I think that speaks to the confidence. Some people might say cocky, but that's what you want. Every coach is going to tell you, I'd rather have to pull a player back than have to try and motivate him forward. And I think when you hear the word, fight, skirmish, whatever in practice, it means guys actually caring. Like that's what you want. Not coach going to say we don't want them fighting or doing some of that, but you really want that fire coming out of both sides, because there's a lot of competition on this team, and I think that's going to bring the best out of everybody.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. There's so many more standouts that we want to get to over the course of Tuesday's practice, which again was the first full day in pads, and that started with Adam Mohammad. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. One thing I noticed when I first started using Monarch was how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I'm budgeting smarter, saving more, and eating a lot healthier, and I can afford that extra tub of protein powder. And shout out to Monarch for all of that. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. Lars, one guy who you and I have been excited about throughout the offseason has been Adam Mohammad. And we have been very vocal on this podcast saying, hey, Jonah Coleman's going to be awesome. We're very excited about what he brings to the table this year, but with the way his workload was last year, getting 216 total touches, if he takes a slight step back in that department, we're not going to be surprised to keep him healthy, to keep him as efficient as possible. I think one of the biggest reasons outside of Damon Williams, of course, who's going to have his own touches, was some of the read options and some of the other things that were positive we're going to see a lot more of this fall compared to last year when Will Rogers was under center, is the emergence of Adam Mohammad. This is a guy who looked solid as a freshman. Obviously, this coaching staff was excited enough about him to play him in all 13 games last season. But as I just kind of was watching him today, it was so clear to me that something clicked for him over the course of maybe the summer. Maybe we saw it a little bit in spring camp, but he is just really starting to figure out how to play the position at the college level in the Big Ten. He was so much more decisive. It's just one of those things where I think there were a couple of plays last year where he was a little bit hesitant. Obviously, the offensive line didn't help anything for him, but during Tuesday's practice, he was quick. He was decisive. It was, I see the hole, boom, I'm just going to accelerate and get through it. Whereas last season, it was, I don't know if that hole is going to stay open for as long as it is. And that's something I'm really excited to see more of from him as fall camp goes along, as we get into the season, because it's clear that this coaching staff wants him to take over the starting role next season. And I'm just curious what kind of increase we're going to see in terms of touches for him after he got 42 carries last year. I think that could truly double this season.
I agree. I was as you were saying that, I was trying to think of the number in my head of what he could get to. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets triple digits. I mean, it really.
I don't think it's going to be that high. Mainly because of the Damon factor in this as well. And
that's fair, but I'm saying he has that type of potential where if it's 80, we won't be surprised. But I also equally wouldn't be surprised if he does somehow end up in triple digits, just because it's the Scotty Graham effect. And really what it is, where when we hear Scotty Graham talk about his running backs and the way he breaks things down, it's very detailed. Obviously, former Ohio State back, knows what he's doing. And so you have to think, what we saw from Adam last season was just a sliver of what I would expect from him this season. And he was able to hold up physically, which is the most important thing. And I think that allows him to play more confident, kind of similar to Jonah in that respect, where I'm not slender. It doesn't really even look small anymore, but if from far, far away, you might not look like the most biggest intimidating guy, but man, he really plays, at or above his strength, because you look at the way he runs inside or outside, he's got that vision, but he's also got the physicality to do either one. And I don't think he's going to be afraid, especially knowing how much success he already had last season as a freshman.
Yeah, I certainly agree in terms of just the success and everything. He's just somebody who I always just like to think back to Scotty Graham's lunch money quote from last season and just how much bigger he's gotten. He's listed at, I think it's 6'1", 219 right now. He is just a big physical kid, and the burst, the wiggle that he shows between the tackles, how quickly he can get outside the tackles if need be as well. Those are all things that I think about, and that's why I was kind of like, I don't necessarily know when it comes to the triple digits thing right now, because it's not just Ahmad Williams that we have to factor into this equation as well. It's Jordan Washington. And that was one thing that I was really curious about. And we've seen kind of throughout fall camp a little bit is when Washington gets down closer to the goal line, I think as of right now, it's just giving everybody opportunities, especially with Jonah Coleman not really needing to do very much during fall camp because you want to just keep him fresh, is we've seen Jordan Washington get several opportunities on the goal line. And obviously the coaches know more than I do, but I don't think that's necessarily his greatest strength. And I think that's something where, as we look at it right now, as we get closer to the season, if Jonah's not in there, I think it's going to be Adam who's getting those touches. And if it is Jordan, it's just an interesting, kind of discussion that you can have of, all right, like obviously the defense needs to stay a little bit wider because he can get outside the tackle so quickly, and as can Damon. So there's a lot of different things to consider there. But when they're trying to run Jordan between the tackles, I just don't think that's, his greatest strength compared to a guy like Adam, which is partially where I certainly can see where you're talking about getting the triple digit carries could come into it. I just don't necessarily think that's going to be the case this year, where it just seems kind of like that natural progression of going to 42 to 81 to 85, somewhere in that ballpark this year with, taking out sacks and things like that for Damon. If he's at 60 to 70 rushing attempts as well, maybe even a little bit higher. And then there's still 30, 45 carries, something in there for Jordan Washington as well. And then obviously next season, we're going to see that big step forward from Adam as well. And that's just kind of what I think this is all leading towards, is just a huge leap forward as a junior, where it's, I understand why this guy didn't play a lot as a sophomore with Jonah Coleman still being ahead of him. And then all of a sudden, if he's top 5 in the Big Ten next year in rushing attempts, like I'm not going to be shocked by that.
No, it's exactly the route that Jedd Fisch and Scotty Graham followed to Arizona, where I think DJ Wiley, and I'm trying to remember the other running back that was ahead of.
Michael Wiley was one of them. Yeah. DJ was the other one.
Okay, I love how we're both combining names now with this. But and Scotty talked about that when he first came in last season. We're like, hey, look, Jonah had to sit behind those guys. And, he still got playing time, but it was once we saw a junior season last season where he got over the 1,000-yard mark, hit the 10-touchdown mark, you just see the natural progression that this offense has. And I firmly agree with you that Jordan Washington's strengths are not between the tackles, but I do think, to your point about what Jordan Washington offers in that equation, I could see a two-back system where as you get near the goal line, even, 10, by the 10, 15, not necessarily the 5-yard line, because I don't think you want to have two backs at the 5, but I could see.
Oh, you could do that. Oh, that would be fun.
And I think that's kind of the route that they could lead here, where you have 3 different options at that point. Damon, Jordan Washington, and Adam Mohammad, and who all can do. And the reason why I say that is you can do so many different things off of that. That's why you might see them lined up. But I do agree Adam would probably be the one that I would bet on to get those carries. Kind of like Cam Davis, when he was with Wayne Talapapa, where he was just the red zone guy, basically. I think that might be Adam's calling card this season.
Let me put it like this. A triple option on the goal line with Damon, Jonah, and Adam would be so much fun to watch. I would die. That would be fantastic to see. Another guy who I want to talk about, who I got to give a shout out to because I was so impressed with him. He was putting together a really good practice. He got wrapped up for a TFL or two. I think Takario Davis had one of them, but was Quade Carr. Quade Carr was somebody who really popped for me today. And he's just kind of an interesting throw into this equation. Maybe not so much this year, but as we get into 2026 and we just kind of look down the road at a world without Jonah Coleman, since he's going to graduate at the end of the year, Quade is somebody who I would certainly like to keep an eye on because he showed the speed. He was able to get outside the tackles today. And one thing that I was really impressed by was for, somebody who was a June enrollee and didn't get a chance to get to feel out anything during the spring period. He came in and some of the physicality and the contact balance that he showed today was very, very impressive for me. And it's just another guy in that equation where I think his strengths, like Jordan Washington, come outside the tackle box. But I think in terms of his frame, he still has the ability to add more weight. And if that's the kind of guy who long-term you are comfortable running a little bit more between the tackles, and Jordan Washington and, obviously with Brian Bonner coming in the 2026 class is somebody else you want to end up get to just run outside a little bit more. You have so many different options there. The main point I want to get across here is I just love the way this running back room is coming together.
Yeah, there's no shortage of talent, that's for sure, both short and long term. And I think that's the important thing to consider in all this, where last season we thought Jordan Washington would have way more impact than he did. And I think the reason we saw that, there's a lot of reasons for it, especially last season, is with all the changes, the offensive line, the first-year coaching staff, all that. But I think it was they wanted to kind of understand the playbook year one, maybe sprinkle in a couple of games here and there where obviously Jordan Washington doesn't play much. I don't see Quade Carr playing as much. But to your point, just learn the playbook, soak it up, learn it from Jonah, watch those guys prepare in practice, still show what you can do, and then next year, once you add a little more weight, once you get truly into your Big Ten body, then we'll see what you can do. But you have to remember, Quade was that second commit behind Julian McMahon, so I think you can see.
Yeah, like late in the cycle too, like November.
Yeah, and I think you can kind of see Scotty's like, hey, you know what? We'll just take one more speeder here. Like, Julian's the kind of the big bruiser, the Jonah, if you will, of that class, and Quaid is a perfect complement to him. It's just when I was watching him first couple of days of practice go through those quick drills, the pad, bounce out. He
moves really, really well.
And I was honestly surprised. And, I was like, man, none of the bags moved. And I'm like, man, that footwork is something special. But, you still want to add the weight so you can handle the physicality of the Big Ten down the road.
Before I move on here, I have one more thing that I want to get out there where I feel like this is something I've seen from not necessarily a whole lot of everydayers or people on Twitter or whatever. It's just, it feels like I've seen it enough that I wanted to address it really fast. I've seen too many people talking about the number of wide receivers and the number of like defensive backs and skill guys that this coaching staff is taking, and that it's not a, in air quotes here, Big Ten kind of approach. I couldn't disagree with that more. I look at the way that, and this is one of the reasons we wanted to talk about Adam and these running backs, is I look at the way they're putting this running game together right now. Jedd Fisch and this coaching staff clearly understand what it takes to succeed in the Big Ten. And while, they're bringing a little bit of a different flair, which is something you and I have talked about since, the conference realignment and all that came together, is you can bring a different flair with the passing game. And that, not a lot of teams in this conference are really set up to compete with you in that regard. But if you can take that aspect of it and also make sure you're solid in the trenches and make sure you can establish the run when you need to go on the road to Wisconsin in November or Maryland or wherever in November and win some of those games in the cold weather, you are going to find a way to succeed in this conference. And I think Washington is doing a really, really good job of putting all that together. And speaking of some of those skill players they brought in, I thought Ephesians Prysock had a really, really nice day on the practice field. Ephesians Prysock is the kind of guy where, obviously I don't think we saw 100% of what he was, just kind of talked up to be during his time at Arizona last season, partially because he wasn't able to play across from Tacario Davis, but partially because it seems like he was dealing with an injury for a good long while. Obviously he missed all of spring practice with what Jedd Fisch called a cleanup surgery, but it seemed like just after missing all that time during the spring, he's able to come out in fall camp, and I've been really impressed early on where he was able to make a nice interception today off Damon Williams, where he was able to keep one of his feet in bounds as he was kind of like falling out. Really nice play by him. It wasn't necessarily Damon's best decision of the day, but I look at what Ephesians has done over the first couple of weeks, especially as we look at some of the 7-on-7s, different team period drills that we've seen. It feels like I know it's something you've talked about a lot over the last couple of days. It feels like DeMond and Kai Horton and Keeney McMillan, whoever's out there at quarterback, they kind of are not testing him anymore, which is, intriguing to see. But at the same point, it gives me so much hope for what the secondary can turn into if Tacario Davis, does return to that form that he had in 2023. And then whoever winds up at nickel, where Leroy Bryant was taking some of the first team reps there today, whoever winds up as this starting secondary is having these two outside corners who can play press man really, really effectively and not give up, quick inside releases on slants or whatever else it might be to really let a quarterback avoid pressures from this 5-man front. This defense is primed to take a big step forward.
It's fair to say, complete pun intended here, his ceiling is very high. Because he's 6'4", and the ceiling, any ceiling he walks into has got to be, clear that by a few feet here. But what was so puzzling last season was it's like, man, you have all the tools in the bag. You have everything that an outside cornerback would want. You have also great coaching too, so there's no reason it's not a lack of coaching either. And it just kind of seemed like it was kind of almost the epitome of Jedd Fisch's year one at Washington, where it's like, hey, it's going to work, but it might not be working this season. It just, for whatever reason, I think it was a combination of things, but from what we've seen in fall camp, we're starting to see the Ephesians that we expected to see, at least that you and I expected to see, in terms of being able to hang outside one-on-one, being able to go and make it. And the times that he has gotten beat, like the one to Raiden Bonsbread that came to mind, that wasn't bad coverage. That was just an impeccable, placement of the
ball. It was a really nice release from Raiden too.
And so, and it's like, I think Ephesians likes getting tested because it brings the best out of him. And that's kind of why I've bitten into I kind of hope schools, start testing him early on instead of Rashawn Clark, like we've talked about, because it's like, that could be a guy where if he gets a couple interceptions early on in the season, that might really start a domino effect for him moving forward.
I do think that's a really fair point. I've looked at it in a little bit of a different light because I feel like so much of this defense does start with those two guys. Because if Takario and Ephesians are able to play up to their potential, like we've been talking about for a good long while now, it just unlocks so many other opportunities, which I got a chance to talk to Brian Walters about during UW's media day that they held last week. And he was just very open. Like I could just see his eyes light up and he was like, yeah, it feels like I'm just so much more free to do just different things when I know I don't have to worry about those guys on the outside. And we know when that biggest test is going to be. It's Ohio State. And it's one of those things where I think even if Washington doesn't win that game and, but you see just like some flashes of success against Jeremiah Smith, against Carnell Tate, that's going to be just a really nice launching point for what could be the last 2 months of the season. Like there's so much there. There's so much promise with those guys, just where they are physically and how they've improved from a year ago. It was something that we were talking about with CJ Christian and Alex McLaughlin today, who we got to speak with after practice. And it's just the amount of weight that both of those guys have put on over the course of the summer. I feel like you can say the same for Takario and Ephesians, who just have added, I think it's 5-10 pounds. It's not necessarily a huge weight gain, but the strength that comes along with that. If you're able to just, play just so much more press off the line. And if Ephesians is able to, just hit on some of those jams that he might have missed at various points last season, like if you go back and you watch, the Oregon film or just some of the other teams that did just beat Washington through the air at different points in time, I think he's ready to take a big step forward. And we've certainly seen a lot of that through the first couple of days of camp. I just want to move on here because there are a couple of other guys that I wanted to shout out. One of them is a name I did just mention in CJ Christian, who he did, he floated around a decent amount in spring practice. I could have sworn I saw him more in the box than in the post roll, but I was wrong and he corrected me today. And now we are seeing him more in that box safety role. He had a couple of really nice TFLs today, and I'm excited for what he brings this defense. He said he's up to 210 pounds, and he talked about just being able to read run fits and how it's fun to be able to play closer to the line of scrimmage and do different things and just make an impact on the game in that way. And with the versatility that we've already seen from CJ, from Alex McLaughlin, from Mikel Esteen as well, having those three guys as your top safeties just feels like a really nice start to the season, especially just, playing off of what we just discussed and what you're probably going to see at outside corner.
It makes me think back to when CJ said, I asked him, who do you idolize? Who's the guy you mold your game after? And he's like, Honey Badger or Tyrann Mathieu. And the way he said it, obviously I'm not going to replicate it because he just said it's way too funny. But you could see it come to fruition in fall camp so far, and even going back to spring, where it's just he plays all over the field. Now, yeah, he can come down to the box. Obviously, no doubt about that is his strength. But just anywhere he truly can make an impact anywhere, and I think that's why they coveted him so highly. When you look at when John Richardson, was hosting him on the Viz and things like that, where obviously, Ryan Walters didn't have a play in that, but it was pretty much John Richardson. And I think that speaks volumes to why, John Richardson knew, and you pair him with Ryan Walters, like that, it's a perfect marriage because those two with the secondary, like you can do so many different things. And I love what, the growth that Alex has also shown as well. But just speaking specifically to CJ, I don't know if there's not really a clear weakness to his game. Obviously, I'm not saying he's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but he does so many different things well. You can truly see why he was, very highly coveted coming out of the portal, and a guy that 3-4 years of college football, that's what he's been doing. And so now pairing him with Ryan Walters and John Richardson, and obviously Taylor Mays being his position coach, like this trio is going to get the best out of him, no doubt.
No, I absolutely agree. And it's an exciting thought because, it's one of those things where just a lot like what I was saying a few minutes ago with, playing in the Big Ten and what you really need to prioritize. Having a guy like that who does have 150 something career tackles under his belt and just has proven that he can be a productive player, finding different ways to unlock him in your defense with what you already have and what you believe is going to take a step forward with several guys in the defensive line, Bryce Butler, Elenius Davis, maybe Armand Parker, right? Having a guy like that on the back end who is not only able to make plays for you over the top, but it allows you to do so much in terms of disguises and varying your looks. If you have a guy like that who maybe he is going to line up in the box and then still drop back and end up playing free safety on the play and the safeties are just going to swap and rotate. There are so many different things that having a guy like that just allows you to do as a defensive play caller, which I think is an underrated aspect of his acquisition as well.
Yeah, and I think, it also goes into speaking when we talk about Rylon and some of the young guys, like he's clearly rubbing off on the freshmen. I think that doesn't take away from the freshmen and what they do individually, but you can see why the staff, Jedd and Matt Doherty, wanted to bring in 2 veterans. Even though they had McKellen, you kind of looked at that room saying, a lot of young guys, like, why would you bring a couple veterans to kind of, squish them down? And it's kind of mend that bridge where you don't want to be too short-handed. You don't want to throw all the freshmen to the fire, despite what this program, Jedd loves to play freshmen, so it's not like that. But it's just you need to have a couple guys in the middle, and that's exactly what Alex and CJ are. 2 guys literally in the middle of the defense on the back end just saying, we're going to marry this thing together.
On that note, I felt so vindicated today. There were several first-team reps, and this is something I've been talking about for a while, where we saw the 2026 starting safeties out there together in Alex McLaughlin and Rylon Dillard-Allen. And I was watching that combination, and it's so much fun to think about because we know Rylon is going to thrive in that post safety role. And Alex, who, when he spoke with us today, did mention that he feels a little more comfortable playing in the box, playing that down safety position, but is still, he has the range and he has the athleticism to thrive if, those 2 guys were to switch and he were to play over the top. So I think that's an exciting thought as well. When I just think about the long-term future, when you mentioned having a guy like CJ who does have 1 year of eligibility remaining, I like where the secondary is planning out to go, not just this season, but as we move into 2026 and beyond as well. Lars, before we get out of here, are there any shout outs you want to throw out there?
Well, I think you had one specifically that you wanted to get to, but you know what? I'm just going to give you the floor on that one because I'm going to co-sign on it, and I just want you to go off on it.
Oh, thank you. All right. So we can end the show with this. Man, I get questions about him all the time because I think he might be my number 1 agenda guy on the team. I just continue to be so excited about what Justice Williams is going to bring to the table. I don't know how much we're going to see of it this year, but this is a guy who at several different points of practice just showed why Kalen DeBoer's staff was so high on him and what he brought to the table. I thought he was underrated even by the time we got to signing day, where he is just such a big, strong physical presence on the outside, but he's also got the long speed. And there are several different points today where he just showed up there. I've got him marked down for pretty sure it's 3 20+ yard gains in my little notes here, including a 25-yard touchdown. And I think it was the final team period of the day from Treston Keeney McMillan, where he just made a really nice move on Dylan Robinson, was able to get behind the defense and make a really nice play on the ball. He did that with both the true freshman quarterbacks today. And this is a guy who, again, we might not see much of it this season, but when we talk about, like we led yesterday's show with, talking about the young talent on this team, that's why. It's guys like that who were like, I don't even want to say he's buried behind a true freshman in Raiden Vinesbright, who continues to get run with the first team, with the second team, or Desmond Roebuck, who this coaching staff is just absolutely enamored with. It's having a guy like that who what kind of talent he has and just has to wait his turn behind Denzel Boston, maybe behind Rashid Williams as well right now, who can thrive out wide in that X role whenever you might need him, is just an exciting thought for the long-term future of this offense.
Yeah, that Williams trio next in 2026, 2027, that is going to be so fun. And I mean, I agree that he's not buried at all. I think it's just, circumstances because he had the injury last season, didn't really get a chance to run as much as he wanted to. But the NFL pedigree, the bloodline, like everything is there. And Jedd Fisch, Jedd Fisch sells the NFL. That's going to be a selling point, I think, more so in 2026 in this fall, though.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout fall camp. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. If you got any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.